Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to talk about how to survive as a healer in raids and hardcore. Now, obviously this isn't hardcore exclusive, you can use this in any version of the game, right? It's going to be applicable still in Classic Plus, and this is something that's applicable all the way up to retail rating, I would say. So this is, it's kind of a very simple fundamental, but it's something that you can use in any version of the game, and you can use this in games like Fellowship, basically any type of game where you're able to see your character. It's like third person, and you're doing a job like healing, where you're gonna have people looking at health bars, right? And I'm gonna make an extension to this, right? We're gonna do almost like a video series based off this, where I'm gonna talk about every raid in Classic, probably even the 20s, and kind of like how to survive in that particular raid. However, not everybody wants to watch like 4 videos that are probably going to be pretty long, because we're going to be very, very thorough and very, very in-depth in these videos. So this video is going to be more of like a general guiding principle video. And if you're the type of person that doesn't like to listen to a bunch of like, a bunch of yapping before you kind of go into raid, you can listen to this one. You get the general idea, and then you should be able to kind of figure out the other raids on your own, right? If you're playing something like hardcore, then my other videos that I'll make in this series are probably going to be more useful to you, because you generally want to have this stuff figured out before you go into the raid, right? But if you're playing on kind of normal, you're going to be playing Classic Plus in the future or something like that, there's plenty of time to make mistakes and learn. And, this is going to be more about how to develop the mindset of staying alive and what to look for, right? And the best practices. So the first fundamental that I think you should get really used to as a healer, and this is going to be combined with kind of the second thing that I'm going to mention, but we'll start here, is you need to get used to looking at your character and then looking at your raid frames, right? And healer is like, I think that it's kind of like a unique class for this, right? Because there's no other class that's really looking at raid frames like to any degree, to the same degree as healer. Like you may have something like a druid that can use their battle res, you have your raid frames out or something. You may even be a raid leader who is like a warrior tank or something, and you're looking at raid frames, but you're never going to look at the raid frames with the same critical eye as a healer is going to be doing, right? Because the whole point of healing is to, put back the missing health on the people in the raid frame. So obviously you need to be looking at the raid frames, seeing who's going to be able to take damage to do that. And I think this is the biggest reason why healers die in raids, whether it be in hardcore or normal anniversary, right? Is they just get this tunnel vision on their character frames. And the burst damage in this game can be like very, very deadly, to be honest. A lot of people they'll look at something like WoW Classic and be like, oh, everybody's like fighting over heals. There's no healing to even go out in that version of the game. And sometimes that is true. But I feel like a lot of the times it's a bit binary, right? Where there'll be periods of the raid where, it seems like almost nobody is really taking that much damage. And then you'll just have these kind of like spikes of damage where people will take insane amounts of damage. You need to be able to react, and it's really locking your attention. And in particular, I think that this style, where you kind of go for those lulls where not many people take a ton of damage, and then all of a sudden people are taking really heavy burst damage, they almost set the healer up to fail innately, in the sense that when you are getting called on to heal up all this burst damage and stuff, you're kind of like super locked in, right? Because you've gone from a period of not having to do this, and then all of a sudden something crazy happens, and it's almost like a bit of a panic, right? You're like super locked into your frames. The only thing you're thinking about is who to cast a heal on next, and that can leave you incredibly vulnerable because now you're not looking at your character, right? Things like void zones, even your general positioning can be a problem. Like maybe you're kind of like in the melee stack where you shouldn't be, right? And you normally would know that you need to fall back, but instead you're kind of like locked in place there because you're just spam casting heals because a bunch of damage went out. Then suddenly you're in trouble, But in a lot of cases, it's just things like that are on the ground that are going to be hitting you, whether it be like, void zones or little eruptions that are kind of coming up from the ground or something. I have that volcanic mechanic from Mythic Plus on my mind when I think of this. And the best way you can really avoid this is just get into the habit of oscillating between your character and then the raid frames, right? So how I like to do it is when I'm casting a heal, that is the best time when I've just started hard casting to then look at my character, right? Because I've just started the heal, and the idea is that I probably want the heal to go on that target, right? I may have to change it, right? That would cost some mental cognition if I do that, which we'll talk about in a moment. But let's say I don't want to change it. So I know that heal is going on that person. I have a good 1 second at this point. It'll maybe a little bit over 1 second, 1 to 1.2 seconds, to now kind of look at my character, look around, see what's going on, take in information, right? It's like a snapshot of the battlefield at that moment. Then I have to pick another target, right? And then I do that, and then I can look at the battlefield again. And realistically, it's going to be you're going to have a little bit less time than this, because once you get really good, right? Once you kind of master the idea of keeping your character line at a baseline, you want to then incorporate another thing, which is you need to be looking for the next person to heal, like looking for the next optimal person. And this is where it gets a little bit more chaotic. And I think that a lot of people skip the first step, and that's why if you have a healer that's feeding to mechanics very often in your raid, that is probably why, because what they're doing is they're going from healing one person and they're just immediately staying on their frames because they're trying to figure out the next best person to heal using all the available information they can see on their frames, right? They're not doing that intermediary step of looking back to their character to see what's around them and stuff like that. And you really want to get used to that. But then once you do get used to that, like I said, you need to bring back in the other component, right? So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be pressing your heal button. You're taking a look at your character, right? Okay, see what's around you, your environment. And then you look back to your frame, kind of like before your heal's finishing, because ideally what you want is you want to be able to move your cursor to the next target before the next heal, is even going to go out. Because if I have frames here, right, and I'm healing this person right here, let's say I'm spam healing this person, but then I need to change targets. If I wait until after I'm done casting, now I can't just press the button again, right? Because if I press the button again, it's just going to go back on target that I was at. And instead, I want to have my mouse already on another frame that needs to be healed. That way, as soon as this cast is finishing, I can finish on the next cast, right? So what it's going to look like practically is you're going to be casting the heal, you're going to be looking, and then healing, right? So you're going to be casting the heal, right? Like this, looking at your character. I'm going to move my mouse to my character as well to represent looking. So cast the heal, looking, then heal again, right? So cast the heal, looking, then heal again. And that's kind of the practice that you want to get into in order to be more aware of your surroundings, right? Increase your situational awareness, and this is going to make you a much better player overall, but it can even make you a better healer in certain cases. Because sometimes, in Classic, it's maybe not super pertinent. However, going into Classic Plus, there may be other mechanics, either that the raid is going to bring out, or certain situations that you might be placed into, or, just certain types of healing spells you might get in Classic Plus, where being able to see where you are relative to the raid is actually important for your healing as well. So we're talking about this now as mostly a personal survivability perspective, right? In other words, the reason why you want to look back to your character in between heals is because you want to be able to, not die essentially in the raid, right? But there could be cases where you can see something that is very important to you. And I've even had this happen to me on Classic with Shaman before, where I've seen people maybe move around in a certain way, and I've actually seen a name where it's oh, if I chain heal that guy, it's going to basically go to a dead end because he's not near anybody else or something like that. So always gathering information from your surroundings, it's always a good thing. And at first you can kind of just take the information bit by bit, right? You don't have to look at your surroundings and kind of be overwhelmed. The first thing you should focus on, especially if you're new to healing, is, once you cast the heal, you get the heal started, you're looking at your character and you're just making sure there's no threats around you, right? And then you go back and then you heal the next person. And then, like I said, you integrate the next thing, which is you've healed, you're looking for threats, now you're looking for the next person to heal, right? And just doing those three things is already going to make you a very strong player compared to most of the people that are going to be healing. And then once you get that down, you can take it a step further, where during this time where you're looking at your character, you're trying to process the fight itself more, right? So you're not just looking at your danger. You kind of get into this mode where once you snap your eyes back to your character, you know immediately whether or not you're in danger by the dynamics of the fight, right? You know if you're too close, you know if you're too far away, you know if you're in the path of an ability, or if you're in the boss's frontal or something like that. So this period of time where after you heal and you press the heal button and you look at your character, you don't need to stare at your character for super long at that point, right? Because now you have an understanding of what's going on in the fight and what will be a danger to you, and you can know almost instantly if you need to get out or not, right? Which means that now, this period of time where you're looking at your character after you cast the heal, it's more about looking at what's going on in the fight and seeing things from a broader perspective, and that can help you with your positioning, right? It can help you with certain targeted types of heals that we may get in Classic Plus and stuff like that. So it's a really good practice to kind of get down, and it may help you a ton in Classic Plus. I mean, I don't know exactly what type of abilities they're going to give us, but it could be something where the actual positioning of the players is a lot more relevant and important than it would be now, right? And you may have to actually notice clumps of players in your raid and be like, oh, okay, that's that guy. Like, if I heal him here, it's gonna, like, maybe there's like a version of Flash of Light, right, where it actually splashes in a very small radius to people around him, and you looking up for that moment and you actually getting a lay of the land and some of where your actual players are, that is actually more beneficial to you than maybe you would initially think. So I think that's the main thing that you should think about when going into like a raid. Is you want to try and be, again, the process is healing a person, looking at your character, right? And then once you get more advanced with it, you're looking at your surroundings and then going back and trying to think about where the next heal should go. And you can combine this as well with kind of applying fight-specific knowledge to this, right? So, for example, there may be some fights like Patchwork where you know that there's no threat to you whatsoever, right? So in that type of environment, it's almost pointless to be kind of checking out your environment and stuff like that. It could just be a distraction, really, right? You just want to be tunneling the health bar, right? And I would suggest that in most cases, even when you don't have a ton of threats, it's good practice to still try and look up at your character a little bit, because, if you focus too much, if you do too many fights like Patchwork, right, where it doesn't matter what you're looking at on your screen, then when it comes time to actually have to look at your screen, you've kind of trained yourself in a poor way, right? But if you have like a one-off fight like Patchwork, where in that fight the only thing that you have to focus on is the health bars, then just focus on the health bars, right? And you'll be pretty much fine for the other fights. And then what you want to do is, for every fight, or even every trash pack, every segment of the instance, you want to have a plan in your mind of what you need to do beforehand, right? So the spots you want to be. A great example of this is something like the Twin Amps trash, right? You need to know what is going on with your raid and where they're positioning things, because that informs your positioning as a healer, right? And that could be the difference between you eating one of those long feakers that basically means that you are completely inactive at healing during that whole 10-second period, or you're staying out of range, right? And you get to heal all you want. You can also get silenced in a scenario like that if you're too close to the melee mobs, the spinners that do the heavy cleave damage. You can also get hit by the cleave damage itself if you're really too close, right? So you really need to take note and take stock of like where you're gonna, of every segment of the raid. You need to have a plan, and this is something that's not gonna develop overnight, right? And if you honestly, like, when I make the guide videos, I'm gonna be going into depth. Don't worry if you can't retain all the information off the bat, right? Because in almost any case, especially when you're watching a detailed guide, it's one thing if you're watching one of those kind of like 1 to 2 minute spot guides where they're just trying to basically help you identify the most important mechanics possible so you don't cause like a major group wipe, or you don't individually die in the fight. But when we're talking about like optimizing performance, right, it's going to take a while to do that. You're going to have to actually play the raid and get experience in it, right? You're not going to be able to watch one of my videos and then just walk into raid and replicate everything that I'm talking about instantly, right? So it's fine if you have to take things a little bit at a time, So like maybe if you're doing Nax, just focus on really getting down the spider wing and your positioning in there, right? Then move on to the construct wing, and then move on to the other wings, right? And then as you focus on doing these things one at a time, they become sort of like second nature. So you don't have to worry about like forgetting the spider wing because you've done it so many times and you've kind of focused on it and you've ingrained it. You've kind of downloaded it into your mind, right? And then at that point, it kind of frees you up to learn the next thing while still being able to have the former thing ready to go, and you're still going to be good at the former thing even while learning the new thing, basically. And I think an especially good thing to do when kind of doing this process of making like a plan for every segment of the raid is just really identifying things that are a threat to you. And this is particularly important on hardcore, right? Because even if your performance on hardcore is maybe not the absolute best, you're going to be able to get through most of the vanilla content relatively easily, right? Because the content's not really that hard. And in most cases in hardcore, you're bringing maybe more healers than you really need to, just to kind of make up for any inconsistencies or anything like that, or any errors in play, right? So the main thing in a version of the game like hardcore is to just focus on living. And the thing you want to do there is you want to make sure that you identify any threats to like your character specifically that will like kill you, and make sure to avoid those, right? So like I'm gonna make specific videos talking through this, but just for a couple examples off the top of my head, when I'm in Naxx, right, one of the main things that I am worried about is in the Death Knight Wing Trash, right? The Death Knight Wing Trash is it can be incredibly scary because the Death Knights can revive other Death Knights that are dead. Basically, they can revive some of the undead that are on the ground, and if they revive them on top of you, and then they turn and hit you immediately on a paladin, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but on a squishier class like a priest or something like that, sometimes you can basically get like one banged, by some of these mobs and stuff like that. So they can be incredibly dangerous, especially on hardcore, because there's the whole one life aspect, right? And you really want to be taking stock of like where you are on the ground, what's under your feet and stuff like that. Another thing is a fight like Thaddeus, right? There's only one mechanic on that fight that's realistically going to kill you. You're not going to die to the random raid damage he throws out and stuff like that. You're going to die to the polarity. So on that fight, when the polarity is about to be cast, the only thing you should be focusing on, you should probably just click on the tank, right? Highlight the tank and just spam the tank. And the only thing that you need to focus on there, you're already automatically spamming the tank, right? So you already got your cursor like doing this. And then you just focus on the polarity. And then once the polarity shifts, you make the instant decision, do I need to move or do I need to stay? And then once you make that decision, now you can go back to healing the rest of the raid and stuff like that, right? So it's just prioritizing the most important thing in the most important moment, basically, is what you have to get used to doing. Another thing is on a fight like Four Horsemen, right? When you are in what's the Horseman? It's like the one that you typically tank in the back left corner, Blamo, or something like that. She's the one with the void zones, right? So that fight in particular is like really easy in my opinion, because healing the tank, you're only healing one target, right? You can just basically put the boss on target, right? And then you do target of target, and then you're just spamming heals on target of target, right, the entire time. And then all you have to do is look at your actual character at this point, and you can be like, oh, do I have to move? I move. Do I not have to move? I can stay, right? And that's the only thing you really have to focus on. It gets a little bit harder when you start to get on fights like Kel'Thuzad, right, where your performance kind of really matters because you have to heal stuff like the tombs really quickly, right? And I feel like when mechanics like that get introduced, that's where people tend to falter the most, right? Because you're so worried about, I need to make sure I get all the melee up before the next Frostbolt volley or the next Frost Tomb goes out, right? And then the Frost Tombs go out, and you're like, oh, I need to make sure I heal the melee up. So you get tunnel visioned on your frames, and it can be a big detriment, right? And it can end up causing you to stand in void zones and stuff like that. I always joke that like in a fight like Kel'Thuzad, there's no reason at all for a melee to die to a void zone, right? And I'm not trying to flame anybody like super hard or anything like that, but realistically, it's a huge mental error for something like a warrior, or particularly a ranged DPS, because you're the only person, right? At least with the melee, sometimes maybe the void zone, if the stack isn't tight, it can be hard to see. But for the most part, I still think it should be pretty easy. As a DPS, if you're dying to things like void zone or stuff like that consistently, there's really no good excuse for it, and it's basically because you do not understand your rotation well enough to be able to do it automatically. And in this version of the game, for most classes, that's actually very simple, right? So it's something you really need to go back and learn. Like, if you're dying to stuff like Void Zones on KT as a melee, it's either you're just not paying attention, you're zoned out to lunch, generally speaking, or you really need to polish up the fundamentals and the basics. Because when you understand exactly what buttons you need to press, you don't need to be looking at your cooldowns, really, right? I mean, you kind of do a little bit on like Warrior to know when the next thing is coming up, but you should easily be able to have those positioned in a way where they're close to your character, you can see them come up with ease, and you're just you're pressing the next one when you need to on cooldown. For a healer, it's a little bit different because you do have to look at the frames, and that is a fight where reacting to certain things like the reaction times and the tome and stuff, it's very important that you react to the right person in the right amount of time, right? So it's much easier to get tunnel visioned on a healer on a fight like that than it is on DPS, and that's why it's so important you still need to be on that practice, right? Where you need to immediately be swapping between your frames and your character. And then once something like Void Zone, or not Void Zones, Frost Blast on KT goes out, I think the best thing to do, right, is once the Frost Blast goes out, your attention is going to be drawn to your frames, right? Like, surely. So hopefully you've just looked at your character before that, and then you cast your first heal, right? And the moment you cast that heal, you're looking at your character, right? Because typically you're probably going to want to cast multiple heals on the same person, right? You're going to want to, dump 2 flashes into that person as a paladin or potentially even a priest. But even if you want to heal multiple people, right? The idea is that you know where the next person is because you should have it like highlighted on your frames, right? So let's say like this is somebody else and not me. They get tomed, and then there's somebody else that gets tomed right here on my raid frames. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press the heal button, right? Then I'm going to be looking at my character for a Void Zone, and then I just immediately swap, right? So here, because I can see in my peripheral vision the highlight, you know what I mean? And you can kind of look at your character the whole time, even during tomes, essentially. Like, once you find the first tome, like the tome that you're responsible for, on Hardcore we have tomes we're individually responsible for, but it's going to be a little bit different on normal. They're just going to have you heal whatever tome you see. But the idea is, like, once you target the first tome, then you want to be looking at your character, and you use your peripheral vision to target any other subsequent tomes that you're gonna do, right? Because the last thing you want is to be caught in a Void Zone while you're trying to heal tomes or something like that. So that was a little bit encounter specific, but you kind of get the idea. I figured I'd use that as a good example because it brings together a lot of the tools that we were talking about, in the first part of the video. So yeah, that's basically how I think how to survive as a healer on Hardcore. And like I said, there's going to be more individual specific videos for every raid and well, probably not every dungeon, but every raid at least. We'll try and get specific videos out. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you learned something from this, and I'll talk to you guys next time.